Hello and welcome back to the Cfctalk podcast. I'm your host Mohammed Salija, joined once again by Rob from. I hope I'm going to get this right. I keep forgetting the name. The Chelsea Social and the CFCW Social. I hope that's the right pronunciation. He's the host of Believe Network as well, and a really incredible journalist, and someone who I can honestly vouch for has some of the best news on the transfer window at the moment with the most reliable news. Rob, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing? How has it been handling the transfer window for the past few weeks with Chelsea and the Koundé saga?
It's one of those things at the end of the day, the transfer window is always its own level of circus. To be honest, I think this year is especially tiring because we also had the takeover saga that sort of almost preceded it. So I think in many ways, Chelsea's transfer window effectively started in sort of March with the sort of, the sanctions and the takeover sort of element through it. So I think everyone, when it's all over, it'll be something that people will be glad for. But at the end of the day, transfer windows are their own unique type of circus. And you just have to sort of accept it, and you have to sort of, live along. You have to try not to, take things too much to heart. At the end of the day, things do change in transfer windows and can change very quickly. And you just have to sort of enjoy the ride, really.
Yeah, I think we'll just get straight into it. Firstly, the biggest news right now, Koundé and Chelsea supposedly or reportedly agreeing a fee with Sevilla. However, Barcelona jumping in last minute and convincing Koundé to join. What's been the difference compared to last year, where Koundé, we almost thought there's no one else going for Koundé except Chelsea, and now suddenly the change in his mind of picking Barcelona over Chelsea.
Sure. I think it's worth noting that there's definitely always been interest from Barcelona and Jules Koundé. There was interest last year. Again, their financial situation is I'm not going to get into on this sort of. It's worthy of its own, significant set of episodes.
Yeah.
But cast your mind back sort of 12 months. 12 months ago, Chelsea effectively with Jules Koundé at several times they thought they'd agreed fees. At several times, Sevilla moved goalposts. The latest I was told was on the day Chelsea sold Kurt Zouma. I was, told by someone who is incredibly reliable to me that the fee was all agreed. And a couple of hours later, it seems Sevilla moved the goalpost. Now, Sevilla and Monchi were very, very keen last summer to basically ensure Koundé didn't go for anything below the release clause, and they had no interest in any deal below that. Chelsea got frustrated. Both sides started blaming each other, as often happens in these sort of situations when, there is an impasse on transfers. Koundé himself got very frustrated because even till deadline day, he had no idea what was going on. I was told by someone on deadline day we did toy with triggering the release clause about lunchtime and just seeing if we could thrash through the paperwork and get everything done. But obviously that didn't happen. In January, Chelsea reapproached the issue and Sevilla basically said exactly the same thing, release clause or nothing else. There was some other stuff going on in the background in January that isn't really important, but it sort of meant that Chelsea decided to basically hedge the bets and wait. Then it came to this summer, Tuchel had reservations about signing Koundé because he wants to go back to a back four. And in the back four, he can only ever really play right back. He doesn't think he can play as a centre back due to his height in the back four. So it meant you'd have to keep the three. Now, Tuchel ideally this summer has wanted to bring in at least two centre backs and a wing back, ideally three centre backs and a wing back. However, a number of things have impeded the progress. Firstly, getting players out hasn't proved to be as easy as Chelsea hoped it would be. There's a number of players at the club still at the moment who ideally themselves would like to go and or Tuchel would like to go, but things like wages, transfer fees are causing a bit of a logjam. I do expect that to at least ease in the next couple of weeks as I think, business comes to the fore and clubs, just decide to cut losses with some players in effect. But certainly from the Jules Koundé sort of situation, Chelsea did have a fee agreed with Sevilla and did agree to meet Sevilla's asking price. They put all of the paperwork in and they got to the point where effectively they needed the green light from the player. A few months ago, the player did visit London and agreed on personal terms that he said was acceptable. However, since then, I'm told that Xavi quite personally has got involved in the transfer and is effectively, it's not tapping up because Sevilla have given permission to talk to the player, but had, been very, very personal with the player and had a lot of conversation with him and effectively turned his mind around to Barcelona's way of thinking. He has sort of persuaded them that, Barcelona are back on the up and that he wants to be a big part of this. I understand that, there is other players who, he's good friends with, including Ousmane Dembele, who's still at Barcelona, and that sort of helped facilitate it. But from Chelsea's perspective, this summer at least, there wasn't really too much more they could do. They agreed a fee, they put in personal terms that were agreed, and they were requiring that green light. And Sevilla were happy to sell Chelsea whilst they just want to bring the money in. Now, in reality, Sevilla are selling him for a lower fee now than they got offered by Chelsea because Barcelona are making those demands. And Koundé made it clear he only wanted to listen to Barcelona's proposal in the end, which is why the club formally did pull out of negotiations, I believe, on Tuesday evening. But ultimately, it doesn't look very good. I think it's one of those where it's a bit of a lesson, for the new owners of if they're going in for a target, they need to be quick and need to be going in quickly and getting stuff done quickly. But also in this case, it was one where they had the frustrations around Sevilla. Sevilla and Monchi certainly still didn't forget last summer, and the fact that last summer was a frustrating negotiation for all players involved. And I also think Jules Koundé himself, that will have factored into his thinking, the fact that, neither party really facilitated the transfer last year, and a lot of the time he was left in limbo.
Yeah, I think I don't know whether there's everything that has been going around with Koundé has been coming into the public information, but just as a fan looking from the outside, it's kind of frustrating that it's not just with Koundé, but it was a similar situation with Rafinha as well, and Lewandowski as well to a certain extent. However, we didn't show as much interest as we did in Rafinha and Koundé. So is it players are scared of coming to Chelsea, or is it just in general Barcelona are giving them a higher salary or better offer, or is it the historic presence of Barcelona that's attracting them to Barcelona at the moment?
I'd say the historic presence is definitely a big thing. The fact that Xavi is there, who, is someone who is a lot of idol for people, and also the fact that Barcelona are very good at tying in their older network. I mean, in the Rafinha deal, for example, it was Deco effectively that facilitated the transfer. He still works for Barcelona. Rafinha was a bit of a different case in that if Leeds had gone down, Barcelona were ready to trigger his £25 million release clause almost instantly, and they would have done it anyway. So, Rafinha's one was more of a case of a bit of opportunism from Chelsea. They knew that Arsenal, he wasn't going to go to Arsenal because they didn't have Champions League football. He made it very, very clear. And ultimately, if Barcelona hadn't come in for the player, Chelsea would have signed, I think, both Rafinha and Jules Koundé. The fact of the matter is they both have, and, at the end of the day, they're going elsewhere. So I think Chelsea need to put it out of their mind. With Lewandowski, again, it's a bit more of a case that all the way along, Lewandowski has always wanted Barcelona or Real Madrid. He's always wanted that big move to Spain. He tried it a few years ago for Real Madrid when they were reshuffling about their attack, and he couldn't make it happen. But he's never really been that keen on a move to the Premier League, and it's always been one of those cases that when Premier League clubs have inquired, and believe me, there have been a number of them over the years that have asked about it, Bayern have said, even when they've quoted fees and clubs have said, yes, we'll meet that, initial conversations with Lewandowski has gone nowhere. I was a little bit surprised that there wasn't more of an attempt actually from Paris Saint-Germain to try and persuade Lewandowski, because I think it also would have suited his partner. But I do think, that Chelsea ultimately, the Lewandowski one, it was more a lot of conjecture. There was, obviously, the manager Tuchel does really like the player and made it very, very clear, but at the same time, it wasn't really something that I think Chelsea were ever really likely to explore this summer.
Because, you're right in saying, Lewandowski weren't too keen on, but the other two players we were very keen on. However, they chose to go to different clubs. Rob, personally, do you think us missing out on Koundé is going to affect our next season or the next few seasons, considering he was quite a young talent that we've been scouting for a while and we've missed out on? However, we've, moved on to other targets or backup targets in that center back positions, and I think Tuchel's made it very clear that he wants solutions there and he wants multiple signings made by the end of this transfer window. So Fofana, one of the big names, as one of the young names in that list as well. Do you think us shifting to these players is us downgrading from Koundé, or are they among the names that probably were presented to Tuchel ahead of this transfer window?
I don't think it's so much a case of downgrading. I mean, like I said, and I tried to explain this on another podcast, was very, very difficult for the club to sort of effectively, because of the nature of sanctions, they were operating about 3 months behind everyone else. Normally, clubs will start planning for their transfers in sort of March. The club couldn't really do that as the situation, the limbo they were in. Then also losing, I think, Pedacek and Marina Granovskaya. Certainly, I'm told Todd Bowley would have liked them to have stuck around at least for the summer. But I think, it was unlikely to happen as soon as the ownership sort of changed. They were very tied into the sort of old ownership. And it sort of, as a result of that, it made a bit of an interesting sort of situation in a way. However, I do think that it's important to, go from there and sort of say that ultimately the club have to, the club, in the future want to change things, and I'm confident they will, but ultimately at this moment in time, they have to accept and acknowledge that solutions need to be found.
Because as a fan it does worry me that we're a week and a half away from our first Premier League game, and very close to almost a month away just for the transfer window to close. However, there hasn't been a lot of movement, at least in the public eye, from Chelsea to we've not seen any sort of big movements made. Yes, we've signed 2 key players. However, it's not even close to the target Tuchel set for this transfer window. So
I would just to clarify, I wouldn't pay too much attention to when you read things about targets of players being set and numbers coming in. I did speak to, I will say that there's a lot of stuff has been reported on. You want X number of players, you want X in. I did certainly I spoke to someone and they said they expected quite a large number, but they did say they expected a number of them to be returning loanees and to be players coming in from the loan system. And if I've said this to people, that in theory, if Chelsea are bringing in Colwill, Gallagher and Broja, which at the moment they're all sort of around and expected to come in, I would say you would struggle to get them in this current market now as players for less than 100 million, as a minimum. So I think, people have to perhaps acknowledge that there are, at the moment there's 5 new players effectively coming into the squad as a minimum, 6 if we include Ethan Ampadu. And I expect at the moment all of them to sort of to stick around. Certainly, Broja himself wants assurances, but I think if the club can give that, they can persuade him. Levi Colwill, I think, again, is a similar situation, although he's more flexible than Broja. Ampadu is very keen to stay around and fight for his place, and his versatility makes him well liked. And Gallagher himself, has made it very, very clear he wants to succeed at Chelsea and wants to stick around.
Yeah, I think these academy players, and we've been hearing since the transfer window started, that Broja maybe a lot of Colwill news coming out that he wants to leave and find a future somewhere else other than Chelsea. However, is it just agents trying to screw up something at the moment? Because Colwill, it seems to me, it seems like a no-brainer for Colwill to stay, considering the situation at Chelsea right now. And if we play a 3 at the back, he will have to be involved throughout the season.
I would say it's one of those situations where, obviously in the public eye, you will hear a lot from what agents want you to hear, not other sort of, situations like that. I think it's worth noting that certainly for Levi Colwill's perspective, I can say from quite prominent information that Colwill is not looking to leave. And any report you're seeing where he says, he's definitely looking to go, he is not. He's just looking for a fair chance. Armando Broja is a bit more difficult because Broja got significantly unsettled last year when he was on loan at Southampton, because effectively Southampton spent a year trying to tap him up and persuade him to sign. He wasn't very keen on staying permanently. He then had injury problems and went off the boil a little bit. But he's come back now, and his representation has been in his ear saying, you need to go somewhere, you need to start. I think they've probably been unimpressed by some of the rumours about Chelsea looking to bring in big name centre forwards, the inability to move on other centre forwards. I do think that certainly, Broja maybe needs a little bit of patience. But
do you believe players like Broja, maybe Gallagher in there, as well as Billy Gilmore, they're more keen on staying at Chelsea, making their future at the first team rather than finding a new club? And would it be beneficial to their own personal career if they stay at the moment?
For Billy Gilmour, it's a difficult one. Like, Billy Gilmour has made it clear he wants stability in his career. I think, he's turned 21 next year. I think he turns 22. He's at a point now where he needs that stability.
But will he
I
not?
think Gilmour,
I know I'm cutting you off, sorry, but will he not get that knowing Kante is not regularly playing for Chelsea? You've got someone, Jorginho's there, and you've essentially become a third choice. But when Kante is injured, you are up there to start a game, and the performances he put in at loan were convincing enough. Aren't they convincing enough to get him that position in the first team?
in all honesty, no, like, not on loan, because his loan at Norwich was a complete failure. I'm not going to sort of sugarcoat it and pretend that that was some sort of roaring success. He was out of the side that was the worst side in the Premier League by far last year. Mentally, it impacted him a lot because he got a lot of abuse from the Norwich fans, who sort of he became a bit of a quasi scapegoat. Realistically, with Gilmour, I think to have any chance of a long-term solution at Chelsea in a long-term future, and I do think he will still leave this summer. I think Everton will come in, make an offer, and it will happen. Regarding sort of Gilmour, I think if he's going to have a long-term future, what he really needs to do is go out on loan this year and have a loan similar to Gallagher, where Gallagher had not a poor loan, but an okay loan at West Brom, bounced back and then came in a brilliant loan at Crystal Palace. He needs something on that level of performance, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I think he's just going to go anyway, and effectively just we'll go somewhere to start, because you talk about saying he's second choice, but then again there's Loftus-Cheek, there is Kovacic. The club have looked at Mateus Nunes. There is long-term interest in Declan Rice. I suspect the club will want to be there or thereabouts in the fight for Jude Bellingham next summer, which is going to be a huge battle between all of the European elite. There is Charlie Webster, who the club have to consider. There are other players, Xavier Simons, Lewis Hall as well, and there's such a sort of logjam. And Gilmour, I think, will be, again, I think Everton will come in. I think they will make a good offer, and they will sort of convince the player, and he will go. Again, Frank Lampard being there will be a big draw for him. He wants that stability, and I don't think he will get it for another loan deal. He's made it very, very clear he's very reluctant to go out on loan unless it's a loan with an obligation to buy and it offers some sort of stability.
No, I think from a player's perspective, it is quite respectful that he wants to now settle down, be at a club where he can have a future at, and if it's not Chelsea, then somewhere else. And out of everyone, I would like to see him play under Frank Lampard because of the opportunities Frank Lampard has given the guys from Cobham while at his time at Chelsea. So very exciting to see what happens with Billy Gilmour and where he ends up at the end of the transfer window. But moving back into the issues at center back and the next line of targets that we have after Koundé, we've got Skriniar in there as well, and it's a 70 million asking price from Inter, if I'm not wrong. And is it
can I just say, in terms of like prices, ignore what you see publicly, because there is often a case with reporting with transfers to focus on the transfer fee rather than the actual cost of the transfer, and often they are two very, very different things. The cost of the transfer includes things like agent fees, management fees, transaction fees, compensation, former club fees, etc., etc. The transfer fee that is just reported will be the raw number that is reported and put in the transfer matching system by FIFA. And often, it's very, very different numbers. It doesn't include things like agent fees in there. I know, for example, there was one signing last summer made by a Premier League club where the cost of the transfer, was actually half as much as what they paid the agents in order to make it happen, in order to facilitate the move and grease the wheels.
But am I right in saying the targets that we have in defense at the moment, majority of those, Fofana, especially the one that we've started talks with a few days ago, he's just signed a deal with Leicester, and it seems like they don't want to sell him, but they might have to, due to the financial issues. Along with that, Skriniar's one on the other name on that list. Chelsea, who are they likely to target, and who are they likely to push for in the coming weeks in defense? Because surely that's one area they really need to focus on before even we get into the conversation of attackers and midfielders.
Sure. I mean, certainly, again, the issue remains at the moment with the centre backs is that effectively what Tuchel wanted to do was replace. Effectively, I'm working on the basis that Azpilicueta is going to go because the club by now probably should have let him go. He wants to go, and I don't.
Is that going to happen? Is that looking likely?
I think it should happen. But I think at the moment the club just need to stop blocking it. There has been a bit of animosity because of the nature of the Koundé negotiations are gone, but I think it probably will happen. It's a case of Chelsea getting replacements in is sort of the main sort of logjam at this moment in time. As I've sort of said, there's a bit of a logjam on both sides because they can't get players in, so they aren't going to let players go until they get players in. But at the same time, until they get assurances of players coming in, they're not going to let players go out. And so as a result of that, teams do look elsewhere. I personally think it would be very surprising if we get the two more centre backs that Tuchel wants. I think it's more likely to be one, probably a wing back, and then integrating one of Ampadu or Colwill, possibly both of them. I think the things that do. There is also, again, people won't like to hear it, but Tuchel will keep players like Malang Sarr around because they're not demanding minutes. They aren't demanding game time. They are happy just to come in when required and to sort of play. And Chelsea aren't certainly not wedded against not selling him. I think it's important to make it pretty clear they're happy to, sell him if a good offer comes in or if an offer comes in, but they're not actively necessarily looking to replace the player at this moment in time. I do think that it will be. I would be surprised if it's Skriniar or Fofana, purely due to the price tags involved and the fact that with Skriniar, negotiations with PSG are a lot more advanced. That said, PSG may want a bidding war. No, but PSG, sorry, Inter Milan may want a bidding war, and PSG did show a reluctance to meet the initial price tag. I know there have been some rumours that Chelsea met the Inter Milan president in the last sort of couple of days. I don't know if that's true. Regarding Fofana, again, Chelsea do know what they have to do. They explored the player before when he was at Saint Etienne. They explored it earlier this year when he was coming back from his injury. He did sign a new deal at Leicester, but again, Leicester themselves have financial issues. And basically, what I think it would probably boil down to at Leicester is they'd have to sell one of James Maddison or Wesley Fofana or one of the big sales or maybe a couple of the smaller sales if they were maybe shifting, say, Ricardo Pereira and Yuri Tielemans. Now, Tielemans I still think will go, but at the moment, until firm offers come in that meet Leicester's valuation, they're sort of stuck in limbo with him as he won't renew. With Fofana, I think if Chelsea did put, say, 80 million on the table, and I think a big chunk of that would need to be you're talking 60, 70 up front, I think they would probably get a conversation. Certainly from Fofana's perspective, I understand he'd be happy to make the move. I've seen stories, they've some photo of him posted in a Chelsea shirt. Again, I don't tend to pay much notice to that, as who players support when they're young is not really that relevant. But certainly, it's not a new target for the club. They've scouted him before. It's someone who Tuchel does like. And again, I think maybe it's a case that because of now they're getting to a point where other avenues are closing, they're maybe having to explore avenues they didn't necessarily expect to have to explore or didn't necessarily expect to be available. What is interesting with Fofana is that A, Leicester do see Levi Colwill as one of the potential replacements, and B, when Chelsea did inquire, Leicester didn't immediately just say completely not for sale. Whereas if it was, Declan Rice, for example, West Ham have maintained that stance all the way through all summer.
The two names you mentioned, James Maddison and Yuri Tielemans, are Chelsea. Would Chelsea be considering them as any options, or they would be out of this?
Maddison, there have been concerns before about issues about his attitude and about his commitment in games. Again, he's been in a better run of form recently, but he's seen as far too erratic. Yuri Tielemans, the club scouted him significantly when he was at Anderlecht and also when he was at Monaco. But again, the issue is that it's felt that eventually he's always just going to want to move on to Real Madrid, and he's never really going to settle anywhere. Leicester rejected some significant offers for him last summer. In reality, they probably should have accepted one of them. He has been extremely disruptive behind the scenes this season. A lot of Leicester fans would, do feel that he's effectively down tools for a lot of the season. And I think, that goes against what Chelsea want to sort of do. I also don't really see Tielemans fitting into the systems that Chelsea want to play, and I don't see where Maddison really fits in, as he's not sort of a traditional winger. Chelsea aren't really playing with number 10 at this moment in time.
Right. Okay. So yeah, quite a lot going on in defense, in my opinion. I think from what I gather from all the information that you've given me, there's a lot going on in defense, and the majority of the transfers that Chelsea are focusing on is defense, which is nice to hear, considering that's the key area that we need to work in. Moving on to our attackers, the recent news of Timo Werner, I guess not publicly saying that he wants to leave, or him saying that he doesn't like it at Chelsea, but offers from not offers but rumors for him for a transfer to Juventus. Newcastle was thrown in the mix as well, from what I read, as well as our Red Bull RB Leipzig as well, for a possible loan. How keen are Chelsea on letting Werner go on a loan, or do they prefer a loan with an obligation to buy, or a direct sale in this summer window?
I mean, certainly Chelsea preference would be a direct sale. At the end of the day, they like Werner's big issue is the wages in Timo Werner's case. He's on an extremely high amount of money for someone who Chelsea thought was going to be effectively that number 9 solution. Obviously, he hasn't turned out to be that number 9, but he's on wages that you'd expect for a big number 9. One thing I will say, Bowley Clearlake are trying to do is change the wage structure at Chelsea so that it's a 60-40 split between basic wages and then things like performance-related wages or bonuses, and trying to move more to what Manchester City and Liverpool have tended to do with their contracts, which is front-load them up to a certain value and then offer bonuses. Now, the benefit of this is you have a better control of your wage structure. The difficulty with that is then you do have situations where clubs can offer more than you up front, and you then do potentially run the risk of pricing yourself out of certain deals. Now, I do think that certainly for these players in question, and for some of the contracts that we're sort of talking about, it is extremely important to note that they're not going to be cheap, if that makes sense. You're not talking like cheap options here. However, at the same time, I do think it's now getting to a point where Chelsea are potentially going to have to bite the bullet a little bit on some of these wages and some of these fees. If they could get loans or obligations, I think they would be happy with that. The issue is going to be persuading teams to take loans or obligations on players that aren't necessarily in top form. Regarding Werner, I understand RB Leipzig are very, very keen and they would like to do something. Again, their interest is doing maybe a loan and then seeing how he does after coming back, or trying to get him in a year's time when they think he might be a bit cheaper. Hakim Ziyech, again, AC Milan would like the player, but again, they'd like to pay either sort of for a loan and then a lower obligation, or alternatively just have a dry loan. And Chelsea, really want to try and get the obligations in impossible. As per the question of Alonso, I do think will go. Again, it's just this logjam at the moment. And until Chelsea get those players out, they can't really bring players in because you've got the wage obligation sort of on there. Now, I do think certainly with Werner, I do think he'll go. I don't know if it'll be permanent. I'd be surprised, but I think a loan is starting to open up, and hopefully the club will get some sort of obligation or at least some sort of option sort of baked into it.
Sorry to interrupt, but would I be right in saying if Werner leaves, then Broja will have to stay, because we wouldn't have anyone else except, I guess, Kai Havertz as a number 9
I wouldn't
season?
say anyone has to stay, because at the end of the day, like if players do kick up enough of a fuss about leaving, the club will not stand in their way. In the case with Broja and West Ham, the club were less keen on letting him go because Tuchel does have a longer term plan and has, made him clear in the longer term plans. Chelsea also weren't happy at the way West Ham approached the negotiation. They felt it was underhand. They felt it sort of was borderline effectively tapping up. It was very similar to what Chelsea did with Declan Rice, in all honesty.
Yeah.
So, I'm not going to suggest that, they shouldn't have done this. It's, it's pot calling kettle. But I do think that increasingly they are realising that for a Chelsea player, they are realising that unless they, accept hits on these players, they aren't going to get them out. Now, this is part of the longer term thing. What they really need to do, and again, next summer is probably a great time for it because there's a bit of a great reset with, I think, 10 players out of contract. They're realising that they need to overhaul the scouting and the planning, and they need to be focusing more towards data driven and data sort of focused players.
Yeah, it'll be quite interesting to see what ends up with that. But Rob, just I'm not going to keep you for too long. I know thank you for coming on, but just before we end the podcast quickly, your top three incomings and outgoings from this transfer window, if you could give us maybe some insight, or maybe on a personal note, or some transfers that you would like to see happen at
In terms of
Chelsea.
transfers, I'd like to see. I mean, I think Chelsea need to get rid of. I think they need to get rid of. I'm assuming again. I'm not going to include Azpilicueta because I think he'll go. But I think they need to move Alonso, Werner, and Ziyech on because all of them want to go. None of them are integral, and I think all of them can be replaced. I think that a centre back has to come in. My personal choice would be Milan Skriniar, but I don't think it will be him. I think we're seeing reports tonight about people like Benjamin Pavard, and whether people like it or not, the club may choose to go for a cheaper option, especially if they realise they have to spend money elsewhere because they were working on the basis that they'd be adding to the transfer budget by some big money sales, people like Werner and Ziyech. And obviously, if they're only going out on loan, there's not that assurance in place. I think that there needs to probably be a sensible attacking signing. Again, Martin Terrier is someone who I did announce, we've scouted quite extensively. I think that could turn out to be a really good move. He's a goal scoring winger, can also play up front. He's very mobile. He's very good with both feet. He can finish in the air. He can play as that 9. I think he'd be someone who offers a different dimension, certainly up there. Failing that, someone very, very direct, and I'm talking, someone like Leroy Sané, who just, wants to get the head down. I don't think it'll be Sané, but he is someone who the club have scouted before. And then finally, I'd say going in for Borna Sosa at left back, as I think he's a very, very good player. He's available for quite a cheap fee, all things considered. And yeah, Chelsea have had extensive scouting of him as well. He's also not very old, so he's longer term sort of value.
So overall, it's not all and done at Chelsea FC for this transfer window. There's a lot more to happen. There's probably a lot more to happen in the final few weeks compared to whatever's
definitely. I would
happened so
say
far.
that from Tuchel's point of view, a lot needs to happen, and I think if it doesn't, you will start to see him getting very, very frustrated.
Would you say he was frustrated maybe after that Arsenal game where he kind of went on and said that we've got players with mentalities that they're ready to leave, but they're just looking for clubs and we need
he certainly was frustrated in that regard, but it was more there was a lot of things on the pre-season tour that caused frustration, stuff that both is controlled by both the old ownership and the new ownership. It's not important to play. It's not worth playing the blame game on it.
Yeah.
But I think the club need to now start moving forward in the right direction, and that needs to be getting the right players in and the right players out.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Rob, for coming on. Thank you for giving us your time, and I really appreciate you coming on. For those of you watching, make sure to follow Rob on Twitter, on all of his social media pages. We'll link it in the description below. An amazing journalist. Go and watch his go and listen to his podcasts on the other shows that he's been on so far, as well as his work on the Chelsea social and the CFCW social. Rob, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it, and thank you guys for tuning in and listening. And if you're watching it on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, leave a like rating, and if you're watching it on an audio platform, make sure to add us to your playlist so you get notified every time we upload, which is weekly at the moment. Follow all of our social media pages to get the latest transfer news, and we will see you next time. Until then, stay safe.